All right, This Week in Mormons. I'm back. I know. Another episode with Kurt Frankum, the guy who's running the ship now behind the scenes. And like I said, it's not my intention for my voice to be on this podcast every week, or if at all. Last week we had some newbies, Melissa and Matt, a brother and sister duo that did a phenomenal job, and you just might hear them again. We'd love your feedback on any of our co-hosts. But this week, we know we have a tried and true, and that's Devin Thorpe. Welcome, Devin.
It's great to be here, Kurt. It's fun. I love TWIM and love a chance to talk about what's going on in the church every week. So thank you for inviting me to be with you.
Yeah, I'm glad you agreed. And I always enjoyed the episodes you were on and your perspective, and so I thought we gotta see if we can loop you in here a time or two more.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you're here. Now you're in Florida, right?
Yes, I am in Jacksonville, Florida. And Jacksonville, you probably don't recall because there are too many to remember these things, but Jacksonville was on the list of new places to get a temple at
That's
conference. Right. And so the party here is still ongoing.
And they haven't announced the location yet, have they?
No. And we convene a meeting every Sunday to discuss where it should be or where it will be. And of course, none of us have any idea.
Any potential places that just have all the indicators, or?
No.
Nice.
Yeah, I think there are folks who've been here longer who have clearer ideas. But yeah, I don't think anybody really knows.
Right. What temple district are you in right now?
Orlando. Okay. So, in fact, my wife and I are heading down in the morning, and then we're going to sort of make it a crazy temple day. We're going to drive down and do a little work in the Orlando temple, and then we're going to drive up to see the Tallahassee temple, which is now complete, I believe, at least on the outside. So it looks like a temple. We visited Tallahassee about 14 months ago to see the temple, and at that point, it was a hole.
Wow.
And so now we understand it's done, so we want to go see it. But yeah, we're excited to have one right here in Jacksonville. Here's the key thing you need to know about Jacksonville folks waiting for a temple, because the first stake in all of the southern United States was my stake center right here.
Really?
In Jacksonville, Florida. Not in Georgia, not near Atlanta, where they had a temple 100 years ago or 50 years ago, really. But no, it was down here in Jacksonville. And so temples have been going up all around as this state gets carved up into more and more pieces and divided and split and shared. And so it's a tiny fraction of what it was when it was formed. And our stake center was originally called a tabernacle. It's that old. It was built
really? Wow.
Built in 1947.
And it's still they're still using the same building and everything.
Yep. So it's my stake center, and so we go there. And as you can imagine, 75 years is really not that old. It looks like a pretty modern building. Okay, so it doesn't look like the tabernacle in Salt Lake or any of the other historic tabernacles I'm familiar with. But it was called a tabernacle. It's at least that old. So anyway, it's kind of an interesting
that's cool
tidbit on Jacksonville history and why we're excited about a temple here.
That's great. So how long is the drive from where you're at to Orlando?
About 2.5 hours. The way I drive, it's closer to 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. So
my wife is never worried I'll get a speeding ticket on the freeway. She's more worried a cop's going to pull me over and say, the gas pedal's the one on the right.
Nice. You're always watching those minimum speed limit signs, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Nice.
I drive an electric car, and so the range maximizing strategy is to go a little slower than the speed limit. Yeah.
So does your dashboard tell you the sweet spot to stay in on the freeway, or?
No, it doesn't. I've done some math. Other people have done math. I think the actual speed optimizing strategy for a long road trip is 70 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. Which is really a pain out west. Here in Florida, though, the top speed limits we ever encounter are 70, but I tend to go a little slower than that. I just hate.
Now, does the Orlando parking lot, the Orlando Temple parking lot, have a place for you to recharge?
No.
Oh boy,
I should
write a letter.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about changes driven by members later, maybe today.
That's right.
That'll be. I'm going to do that when I go tomorrow. I'm going to say, hey, you ought to do that.
It's true. It's true.
And I'm sure the guy with the checks that recommends at the counter is the guy I need to talk to.
Yeah, I'm sure he'd love to get that feedback.
I got to figure out who is the guy, though. That would be a good idea.
Yeah, for sure. So anything else, Devin, in your life that would be worth updating the TWIM audience?
No. Well, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
Can I say one thing? So in my real job, I do a lot of things, but one of the things I do is organize a conference where we talk about investing in little companies that are working to solve big problems. And so our next conference, it's called the Super Crowd 23, will be May 10th and 11th. So just visit thesupercrowd.com to get your early bird tickets.
Where's the venue this year?
It's virtual. So you can participate from anywhere in the world.
Very eco-friendly, right on brand for you, Devin, right?
Yes, that's right.
That's cool. Nice. Well, I'm glad that your voice is on TWIM once again, and
thank you. Thanks for
where's a good jumping off point for the news this week? Which story stood out most to you?
Well, I don't know that it stood out most, but I feel like we teased it, so maybe we should go there.
Okay, let's do it.
Peggy Fletcher Stack wrote that interesting piece this week in the Salt Lake Tribune about changes that have been driven by individual saints that didn't apparently come from the top down.
Right.
And of course, this is a controversial topic. Let's see. Ahmad Corbett, who's in the Young Men's General Presidency, gave a speech the other day to a group of Latter-day Saint chaplains and basically said that anytime we make any suggestions about putting electric car chargers in the temple parking lot, we are evil.
Oh boy, repent.
Must repent. Yes. So Peggy Fletcher Stack made a list of all the things. I think she got some historians to help her, but she put together the article. She talked to Paul Reeve, who's a historian, about things that had changed because of members. And it goes back in history, right? There are lots of examples. The primary was credited broadly by church officials to an idea by a member who wanted to teach kids church principles. Sunday school back in the 1840s was brought about not by the brethren top down, but by a guy who said, we ought to be doing this. And eventually it was replicated throughout the church and was established, adopted by the church. But it was a very organic grassroots thing. A little more controversially, well known that lots of people were lobbying, perhaps, for the church to drop its priesthood ban long before it happened, a decade or more before it happened. And so it's really, that's another one. But humanitarian service was one. Kate Kelly gets all kinds of grief in the church. She's been excommunicated, but after she organized ordained women got a lot more say in the church. Women were added to some key priesthood committees at headquarters. Women have been invited to pray in general conference. A number of fairly significant things have come about to be more inclusive of women. And furthermore, President Oaks described the nature of women's service in the church when they receive a calling as receiving delegated priesthood authority and exercising that. So it's interesting. We've begun to talk about many women's issues differently. Okay, so enough examples. But I want to share kind of a crazy anecdote.
I love it.
My personal connection to this is not actually electric car chargers at the temple parking lot yet. We'll talk about that next time I'm on. But when I was on my mission, so this was about 120 years ago. I was on my mission in 1980, I think. No, 83 to 85.
Nice.
My mother, my parents and I lived in President Kimball's ward when I was young. Before my mission, long before my mission. We moved out of his ward probably 10 years before this anecdote. But it gave my parents an opportunity to meet him a few times. I personally met him several times.
Was this like downtown area or?
No, he was living downtown-ish. Depends on how you define downtown. Sure. But he was living in the Bonneville Stake, I think. But he was living on Laird Avenue, which is about 12th South, and at about 2100 East. That's where
gotcha.
Cute little house, but just a little old bungalow. Nothing fancy. So anyway, my parents felt like they knew him. My mother was sick and tired of one-piece garments, and so she drew renderings like you would see in like a fashion magazine or something, like kind of like somewhere between a fashion rendering and a pattern. But she drew out what two-piece garments could look like and sent them to President Kimball right before they happened.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. So this was before my mission because I had two-piece garments on my mission. I owned one pair of the one-piecers, but I never, I think I wore them as a novelty once. But so she did this before. But anyway, she takes credit for two-piece garments, my mother. Until the day she died, she took credit.
We need to build a statue somewhere.
Of course, we didn't get a letter from President Kimball saying, thanks for this good idea, we'll implement it. So my mom thinks she did it. So anyway.
There it is. So she could be on this list for sure.
She thinks she deserves to be on this list. She's now not with us anymore, but she would definitely claim to be that she was omitted only by accident from this list.
Another one that isn't on this list, at least I didn't see it, is Seminary. I believe was started by a gentleman at Granite High School in Salt Lake, and the church adopted it as well. So,
yeah. That's another great one. And, there's a really recent one that's rather benign, but the Manti Temples, Temple murals, they were coming out, and then the church said, oh, no, we'll save them. And the church kind of dodged crediting the members who freaked out over this. Right. Members in that neighborhood really did freak out. They said, no, you can't do this. Yeah.
Well, it seems like a lot of these controversial ones, even ordained women and whatnot, I don't think the church would ever go on record or admit that, just happened to be at the same time or whatnot. Same with the youth interviews. What is it? Allowing an adult to sit in on a youth interview and whatnot. And maybe not on some of those. To me, it's a little bit of a stretch on some of them, but nonetheless, it is an interesting dynamic we have in our faith tradition as far as how things happen. And, we like to keep it simple as far as like the narrative of, top down. There's a scroll from heaven that comes from through the ceiling, and we just know. And I think just from both of our experience, I'd imagine, serving in leadership roles, we like to think that, the primary presidency was, God had written these names down in heaven and revealed them to the bishopric. When in reality, bishoprics get in a room, we talk about things, we consider who's moving, who's not, and we make a choice. I remember one time as a bishop calling a primary president, and I think it was 2 weeks in, she came to me and just said, not doing it. I'm like, wait a minute, we just called you. And, I sort of swallowed my pride as I stood up and called another primary president. But it's just the messiness of a lot of these things. And
it is
I'm okay with
true.
that,
Yeah. It's so true. And the church now is training us. And you know this better than I, but they train us on like how to do a ward council meeting. And a bishop is strongly encouraged to do a lot more listening than 20 years ago. Right. It's all about gathering input, reaching consensus, collaborating. Very different sense of how a ward should run that's emerged recently, and it's great advice. That's how pretty much everything ought to run. And so we sometimes think we're getting more comfortable with the idea that it might work more like that at the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency, that they're deliberating, pondering, praying, getting ideas from hither and yon, as well as inspiration from our Heavenly Father.
Yeah. So, and did you hear or read or Brother Corbett's talk that Peggy is referencing in this article?
I did not hear it, read it, or see it. No.
Well, I listened to it, and yeah, it was.
Oh yeah, okay.
I appreciate it, and I thought there's the place for it, because I think in recent days, especially with online platforms and the ability to generate, a movement or an audience behind a specific cause, and she says here, let's see, indeed, that is how change was described in a recent speech by Ahmad Corbett, first counselor in the church's Young Men General Presidency, to a group of Latter-day Saint chaplains. So she says, while activists within the faith may be promoting good causes, Corbett said, they should not do anything that would undermine confidence in faith leaders. Such efforts effectively but subtly undermine the doctrine of Christ, he said, which is God's plan for changing, saving, exalting his children. So, and then, talking about these, about primary and Sunday school, to me, I don't think necessarily these came about because of an activist nature of them, where maybe ordained women had much more of an activist or a, marching on certain places or having a sit in or whatever. I don't know. To me, I feel like she didn't necessarily delineate between having a good idea come up from the bottom up as opposed to an activist nature where a group gets together and marches, on Temple Square.
Right.
I think there's a considerable difference between those things, but
yeah, that's a fair point. And yeah, it's hard to expect any organization to respond kindly to people marching angrily out front, right?
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and if you do, especially if they have a good idea and the church makes a change, then people think, oh, that worked. We should do more of that. And then the church has a bigger problem, with it just a rotating door of protests and whatnot. So, should we talk about Gordon Monson? And as he says it, that worthiness is an obsession in our faith tradition. You saw this article,
I think
didn't you?
I think this was an interesting question that he asked.
Yeah.
And I think it probably, like so many things in the church, varies a little bit by ward, by the culture of where you live. But I certainly feel this. It's in some ways my greatest challenge, right? As an active member of the church for my entire life, every minute, never missed not like I didn't miss a Sunday, but I've been active tithe paying my whole life.
Yeah.
And yet I go to church and I'm reminded every week to repent. I'm reminded every week of all the things I'm not doing quite well enough.
Right.
And I'm like, this wears on you a little bit. But I at the same time, there was a sister missionary in our ward serving from Utah. I think she's from Utah in my ward, but she's just Sister Speth was in our ward. And she gave a talk, and I think it was January or February, about repentance. And it really helped me a lot think through this. And she said, this is how self-improvement happens, right? That's what self-improvement is, right? We're trying to do better, right? And we call it repentance here in church. And all we're doing is saying to the Lord, help me on my self-improvement journey, right? And she was much more articulate than I am, but it was really reassuring to me that there is a framework for thinking about these things that isn't the same language we often hear. But anyway, I thought it was interesting. And so, Gordon took us through the Temple Recommend questions and asked, how do you feel about these and all? but it is kind of an interesting question. But I was grateful for Sister Speth helping me see repentance and the need to do better and be better in a more as God-supported self-improvement. And in that way, you go, oh yeah, who's not for self-improvement?
Yeah, I'm all in there. Yeah. So did she address the concept of worthiness, or that using that term, or?
She didn't specifically use that term, and so I'm a little bit off Gordon's topic, just a little bit. But I think you kind of recognize this in church, where we often see these messages about how we could be better ministering brothers in elders quorum, or better ministering sisters. And boy, we've heard that our entire lives. We called it different things. I'm not quite old enough to remember when they were ward teachers. Isn't that what they were before home teachers?
Yeah, ward teachers. And then block teachers, I think, for a time before that.
Yeah, so it's all kinds of different things, but it's the same basic program. I know there are a lot of people who are excited about the big changes, but it's the same basic program. We check on each other. And yeah, it's easy for an elders quorum president or a bishop or a Relief Society president to leave people feeling kind of guilty because they haven't done their ministering the right way. And then you could hear in sacrament meeting 2 different talks on different themes where, again, you're being reminded that you're not living the word of wisdom enthusiastically enough because you don't exercise enough, or you eat too much meat, or who knows what. And then you could hear another talk about tithe paying, and you're calculating it wrong, or you're not paying it soon enough, or who knows what. And so you could come away from church with just kind of this, oh man, I didn't do that. And so,
are they ever satisfied with me? Right?
Yes, right. And then the Temple Recommend interview that he kind of highlights is this, this assessment. And if you see this as an external assessment, it really is painful. To the extent, I guess, we can internalize it, it feels less onerous. But that's kind of a higher law kind of thing, which is kind of the goal of the temple, get us thinking in a higher law, but to take, that personal responsibility to own our worthiness rather than externalize it. But I don't know. Anyway, it's an interesting piece.
So I guess the headline here is the LDS Church obsessed with worthiness? Who decides it? You, your bishop, or your God? And I don't know. There's all sorts of variables and components to this discussion where, and maybe in modern times where mental health, we're much more aware of mental health, anxieties, and things, and so we've created this worthiness term and put a lot of baggage into it. And then as we're trying to, use it in ways that simplify discussions and maybe a church setting, or help youth understand that there's certain standards to go to the temple, but then there's just such heaviness to that word, and it's a loaded term. And, we want people to feel worthy no matter what, when in reality, there's still this component of like, well, what about, going to the temple? And I feel like it's like at this crossroads of where theology meets administration, where, because we have these beautiful doctrines of the temple, of going to the temple and participating in higher ordinances and promises and whatnot. But all right, how do we determine who we let in that door? Right? There's one extreme where what if we just let anybody in that door? I remember this past year I had the opportunity to go to the Holy Land, and walking in some of these Jewish synagogues, or the tomb of David, and you walk past these Orthodox Jews who are doing some type of rite or praying in a way that, for me, an outsider, like, okay, that's kind of weird, but hey, you do your thing. I'm just here to see the tomb, whatever. And, could we do something like that? That seems a little extreme, to just go about our temple ordinances while anybody can walk in. So maybe that's too far, but so where do we draw the line? And then it gets, well, we need a list of questions. And then we're attempting to measure something that really can't be measured, right? Like, how do you measure the heart of an individual? And Gordon Monson makes this point of like, there's individuals who could check off all the boxes, but some who are maybe as pure as Mother Teresa, who maybe appreciate a cappuccino in the morning every once, and and so it's just sort of a mess that we've found ourselves in.
It is, I think, maybe the fundamental point he was trying to make, that someone who drinks a cup of coffee cannot go to the temple if they're honest about that, and yet could be, Mother Teresa character, morality, and every other respect aligned with church doctrine, and some other person who is mean to everybody. Because there's no question about, are you mean, right? You could be mean to everybody. You could be mean in your calling. You could be a bishop and be a turd, and you would get into the temple, right? There, it wouldn't even come up. It's not there. It's not a question. Are you mean to people? Not there. Yeah. So, that was kind of his point. Yeah. That it's not a perfect measure of genuine morality. It's kind of what we're saddled with for the moment.
And in the recent years, the church has made significant changes to the temple recommend questions, which were very encouraging from my point of view. I was like, oh, great. We're not as black and white with some of those questions, and maybe more open to discussion with, looking at case by case situation. But I don't know. I just feel like maybe there's more to consider. And I'm sure there's council meetings and committees in the offices of the church who've just spent hours upon hours over this question and how to do this, because it is a tricky one. I mean, can we just ask one question and I think Gordon Monson makes this, he says, there are many ways to gauge faith and worthiness beyond a standard list of Q&A coming from the other side of the table. The belief here is the real measure of it. The real meaning is yours and God's to comprehend and to determine. God is the one who knows all. God is the one who loves all. God is the wisest of all. God is the judge of all. And to me, I wonder if we could even simplify it to: Are you striving to believe? Right? Are you a member of the church with good intentions and wanting to have good things happen in your life? Yeah, I am. Because I mean, there are individuals who maybe couldn't say that. Like, well, I don't really believe, and this was really tricky as a bishop. I remember one individual I sat down with as his bishop going through the questions, and he couldn't really get behind the idea that Joseph Smith was a prophet. And I'm thinking, oh, well, I'm sorry, I don't know what else to tell you, but that's sort of part of the deal here to go to the temple. I don't know. I'd love to find a loophole here, but I'm really having a hard time doing that. And it was sort of a discouraging discussion for him. And again, I look back on that situation, that circumstance, and sometimes I go back and forth. Well, maybe I should have just, looked past that and moved on, but I don't know, just a really tricky dynamic. And now we've project these, this worthiness concept onto some of our institutions, like working at the church or teaching at BYU Idaho, and we've in recent weeks,
that's
some professors
controversial suddenly,
and
lost their jobs.
And the last thing I ever want is for a repentance process to feel like a punishment. And if you're losing your job because you're in the midst of a repentance process, I don't know how else it could be seen but a punishment, and so. And I just think this is a worthy discussion to explore. And I don't have all the answers. I don't think you have all the answers.
No. I certainly don't. When it comes to employment, I was thinking about this. If you worked at Coca-Cola and they said, well, are you, sharing secrets with Pepsi? And you said, well, yeah, sometimes I do. They'd be kind of ticked.
That would probably be grounds
probably
of
wouldn't work
dismissal.
there anymore. And so, it's not, this idea of loyalty isn't exclusive to the church, and tying that to employment isn't totally unbelievable or totally baffling. But it really is an interesting question. And it's so painful to think that someone who is close enough to the church to have a temple recommend and to work for a church university, and to then think, oh, we don't want you doing that anymore. That is hard and painful to think about. So I sure hope that the folks who are doing that are doing it as prayerfully and as generously and as kindly and as patiently and as lovingly as possible.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really the best we can do at this point with the circumstances that as they are. So, all right, what else we got? Any other article direction you want to go in?
Well, there's, I thought, being the liberal that I am, it was fun for me to see some conservatives come out this week to explain why the church was wrong to support the Respect for Marriage Act, which I think, if I understand correctly, passed the House today as we're recording this. We're recording this on Friday. I don't know when you'll share this, 3 months from now.
Hopefully tomorrow, but we'll see.
But so by the time people listen to it, Biden might have signed it, and it'll be law. And in no small part because the church put their finger on the scale and said, we support this version, right? Because it was close. It was the kind of thing that was close, and the church's support clearly was tied, in my mind at least, to Senator Romney and a few other people voting to get this passed. So I think it mattered in this case. And as one who was very uncomfortable with the church's position on Prop 8, even back then, I could tell you a story about that, but I'll save that for another day. But it was interesting to see some folks who are quite conservative say, no, the church is wrong. The church should not have done that for a variety of strategic reasons. And I won't get into their rhetoric and their arguments. In my mind, you may want to talk about that, but I was less interested in the substance of the arguments. And I listened to some, and they're very articulate, very thoughtful. I don't mean to suggest that it's not worth talking about them because they're unimportant or uninformed, but the key issue is that as a liberal who goes to church, I often feel somewhat ostracized and belittled by the rhetoric I hear from the pulpit in church, where conservative politics and gospel doctrine tend to get interwoven sometimes into a sacrament meeting talk or a priesthood lesson in ways that don't harmonize for me, right? And the church has always said, you can do what you want on politics. That's a different thing than what you do in the church with our doctrine. And we may have an opinion. We may tell you how we want you to vote, but your standing in the church is not tied to whether you are donating to the cause or voting with us on these issues. Your worthiness is not determined by your politics. And it's usually, if we're being honest, the liberals that are kind of feeling a little ostracized. So it was really fun for me to see the conservatives saying, no, the church is being too liberal on this. They shouldn't have taken that position. So it's just a reminder in my mind that, in fact, the church has long said, you don't have to agree with us on politics. You don't have to vote the way we ask. But we, on these matters of moral things, we may ask you to vote, but that you don't have to get a temple recommend, for instance. So anyway, sorry.
No, that's
I think
good.
I got that out. That frames the discussion.
Yeah, I really, I listened to this episode. It's on the Mormon Land podcast. We'll link to this episode. It is worth, from my point of view, as a very politically conservative individual, listening this was really helpful for me to just see the struggle from our side of the politics this time, right? And to see how they articulate through these concepts, because you're right. I mean, even I'll be the first to admit, it would be a lot more difficult for me if I was liberal and going to church and whatnot, just the casual throwaway statements of that they can send the message of I don't get why it's so hard for liberals if they just got on board with the prophets, just do what the prophets say. And then, it will be good. So just get with the program. Right. And so this is where politics and the church, the worlds meet. And it's interesting to hear just how, it's clear throughout this conversation that these men are very faithful. They believe in these as the leaders of the church as prophets, seers, and revelators. But they're saying, you know what, President Oaks, get out of politics. There's no room for you here. This is not your specialty. Let us handle it. And one, maybe one who leans a little more libertarian, I sort of appreciated the perspective of, you've given us the principles, you've taught us the things. Now we will enter the political realm and do things there. And according to how we believe in our faith and whatnot. And because it is sometimes difficult, and I'm sure from the liberal side, it's difficult when that statement comes from the church, and it's like, oh, well, I really want to push my point of view and stand and deliver on my perspective, but now I'm sort of going up against the church, it feels like, and I don't want to be that guy, right?
Yeah. And so it was fun for me to see the angst on a conservative's face.
That's right.
With this, but I think it's just it's an important reminder to all of us that church doctrine is what belongs at the pulpit and in the church, and then we can talk politics on podcasts.
Yeah.
Right. So.
All right. And it can confuse from a theological standpoint. It can be a little confusing. It's like, okay, I have this family proclamation, which we tout as very inspired. And, what is the last paragraph that says, all government should, I'm paraphrasing, of course, but should put forward legislation that will protect, the traditional marriage or whatnot. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, this one does, some could argue it doesn't do that, but now you're behind it. And so where are we standing with the theology of all this? So it's interesting discussion for sure. Definitely check that out. The Mormon Land podcast, of course, right after you listen to This Week in Mormons, because this is where you should, your primary source for news.
That's right.
So
that's right.
Nice. Let me see here. What do we got? Oh, you'll be proud of me, Devin. As a politically conservative person, I interviewed for This Week in Mormons. I interviewed two individuals from LDS Earth Stewardship. This is a nonprofit organization. Are you familiar with it?
Oh, yes, I'm familiar with the organization, and I listened to part of your podcast. I didn't get it finished, but I turned it on to listen to it yesterday. Yeah. I saw you posted it yesterday. Listened to part of it today. So great podcast. Very important discussion.
I randomly came across a tweet that they shared or whatnot, and I was intrigued by the fact that Bishop Cossé, this was the focus of his recent General Conference talk. Did you give a good fist bump when you heard Bishop Cossé's talk?
That's right.
Nice, yeah, and because this is one thing I know, the environmentalists in the church, that are very passionate about these things. They've asked for years, why doesn't the church at least give a nod to the issues and complexities of protecting and being good stewards of the environment? And this is an organization that does that. So anyways, I just want to plug people to go back to the last episode in the podcast feed and listen to that. And I try not to ask softball questions the whole time, but I've appreciated their perspective and what they're doing. And by the end of it, I thought, oh, wow, this is cool that these organizations are out there, that Latter-day Saints who are want to promote good stewardship to the earth and whatnot, have a place to find their tribe and put on events and get that message out there. So anyway, I want to mention that. Yeah. You got anything else on your side? Do we cover the big ones you want to?
The last thing I was going to mention is that there's a new book out by, where'd I go? But a new book called Loneliness, The Documents, that was a new book that was written by a guy who wrote a book about the same topic 25 years ago.
Is it called In Sacred or Loneliness or just Loneliness? I'm trying
You're
to find
right. In Sacred Loneliness. Okay. I apologize. He wrote in 1997. Right? Yeah. So 25 years ago, he wrote Sacred Loneliness, the plural wives of Joseph Smith. And what he's done is just as an echo of that, he's assembled some of the documents he worked from for the first book to tell some of these stories more directly in the women's own language. And it's really fascinating to read this fairly lengthy piece. I'm thinking again, it was Peggy Fletcher Stack. Yeah, it's Peggy and David Noyes. But I think of Peggy as a friend of mine. She's just great. I tend to read everything or nearly everything she writes. But yeah, fascinating article, listening to read through some of this history. I was not well aware of Joseph's polygamy before the 90s, but I knew it. I was not under the impression that polygamy started with Brigham Young.
Yep.
And I think the article suggests that some members of the church were caught off guard, that they didn't realize that Joseph Smith had practiced polygamy. I find that in a way confusing, but I don't doubt that it's true. But anyway, it was interesting to hear, his practice of polygamy, like so many other things in the church, we get better at it over time. And so he married about 10 women who were married to other men, and they all stayed married to their other husbands. And there's no good record, no good evidence on whether he consummated all of those marriages or not. And of course, that's an interesting curiosity. But there's really not much evidence that he didn't. And so it's really kind of an interesting look at how, at the earliest days of polygamy. And the author, Peggy asked the author what she thinks of his youngest wife, who was just 14. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting. The author said, I think it was a mistake, but he said in that case, he does think there is good evidence, at least some evidence, that Joseph didn't have sex with her when she was 14, that they married largely at the invitation of her parents when she was 14, and that if they ever did consummate the marriage, it was when she was older. So anyway, interesting stuff.
It's so easy to see polygamy as just sort of a point of history. Yes, it happened, it didn't, or but to have someone put together actual stories and the words of the human beings involved here, it can really help you gain a better understanding, or sort of wrap your arms around the complexity of this tradition and what happened in our faith, and hopefully give you a better place of faith to go from there. So awesome. It's a fascinating part of our history. Yes, to say the least, for sure. So one article this is a church news article, but it says one Latter-day Saint football player's unexpected journey to this year's Army-Navy game. Now, and the Army-Navy game, I believe, will happen as the same day that this episode publishes. Mm-hmm. But this is a fantastic. His name is Creedon Folger, and he grew up here in Utah. He went to high school in Hiram, Utah, at Mountain Crest High School, and he broke his hip or his pelvis 3 different times in high school. One that just got tackled awkwardly and broke his pelvis, and then he thought he was good 6 weeks later, and then tried to play in the state championship game, and then broke his hip a second time, and then and he broke his hip just punting the football, because he says his tendons and muscles were so strong that his body broke his own pelvis. Crazy stuff. And then broke it a third time as he was grounding a ball during a baseball game. Anyways, and then that led to him going on a mission, which really developed him personally, and then came back. He was planning to go to Utah State, but his scholarship was gone. So then he went to Navy, who is coached by, now I got to say his name, Coach Nyamu Talolo, who is a stake president in that part of the country. And so anyways, it just talks about sort of a good, they could probably sell a good screenplay to a Latter-day Saint filmmaker about Creedon's path of just what the influence of a mission can have, and going through adversity, and now being able to play in an epic football game. So a good feel-good story.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's a great story. Absolutely a great story.
We did, it seems like as we have a team that posts things on our the This Week in Mormon's social media pages and whatnot. It seems to be the church is making more and more of an effort. There wasn't a specific article, but just like more information coming out from the church as how to apply and be a part of FSY activities for the coming summer and whatnot. And there seems to be more of an emphasis on really making sure that this takes off. I think with all things youth, COVID really, as pretty much everything else, but getting momentum in the new youth program was really difficult. And now the establishment of FSY activities. And one commenter, even on one of those posts, said that he applied to be a advisor because he heard that they were trying to get more and more male advisors, and then they basically told him, "We're not considering your application anymore because we've had to cancel quite a few FSY events." And so, anyways, it'll be interesting to see how FSY happens maybe this next summer, and hopefully it gets some momentum behind it. So
yeah, that is interesting.
What else is going to mention? Oh, another thing we are, our team is doing is we're posting every day. We're highlighting a church Christmas music. And yes, we've already done Mr. Kruger's Christmas, the classic of classics. Devin, any other than Mr. Kruger's, is there a church Christmas like clip or movie that your mind goes to automatically?
Oh, wow.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, but the Mr. Kruger's Christmas, I got to tell you, see, that came out when I was, late teens, late teens.
Late 70s.
And so it was probably 1980.
Oh, okay.
Kind of coincident with the arrival of VCRs. And so it was the first time, for instance, missionaries could take a videotape around to show
or a beta
people.
tape, if that was your flavor.
Yeah. And in fact, missionaries at that time, I remember, were carrying the VCR, right? Because it was still early days, right? You didn't just take the tape to shove it in someone's VCR. You had to
no
take
more
the
flannel
VCR.
boards. Take the VCR instead.
Yeah. So, I have a great emotional connection to that for a variety of reasons. But let's see, what others are there?
We're featuring the this is a more recent one, the Coat, which is an animated short film that talks about Heber J. Grant and giving his coat away and things like that. So,
that'd be good. It's not a Christmas movie, but it sort of makes that a good Christmassy point. Is Cipher in the Snow? Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yes.
It's
now,
not
what's
a
the premise
movie,
of that?
But the premise is that this kid basically gets off the school bus one day and dies, just literally dies. And so they start trying to figure out what caused him to die. And it was that he had been rejected and unloved everywhere he went.
Oh, my goodness.
If I think that's the story, as I recall. But it's a very, moving story. It's sort of like, what was that Netflix series that came out a year or two ago about the 13 reasons I killed myself?
I never saw any of that, but kind of a heavy.
It was the same kind of, it was the same kind of thing. Very, very well done, but by BYU back in the day.
Wow.
But kind of a Christmassy movie that we should be nice to people.
Well, maybe we should put that on a list of highlights. So, and then it just seems like all over the news feed in relation to our church it seems like in last week they mentioned this, and as far as these local church wards or stakes doing some remarkable exhibits and sort of inviting the community, like there's an international nativity exhibit in London that's happening. And then they mentioned a few others, but it's just cool to see local units sort of stepping up and not waiting for, the Tabernacle Choir to do their thing and to point their neighbors to or whatnot. Say, hey, we're going to do something cool down at the local, stake center and we're going to make it happen. So look for those. Yeah. Really cool to do. This is a little cross promotion between Leading Saints and This Week in Mormons. We put out a question at Leading Saints this week about if there was one thing about church decor that you would change, what would that be? And we're getting some interesting comments as far as people responding. A lot of comment on artwork and things like that. And what comes to mind other than chargers in the parking lot, Devin? What other? What other? Any? If you could change one thing about church decor, what would it be?
That is a great question. I think, here it is. Here is the one thing I would change. I would get back to two things. So it's two things. I'm sorry, I'm going to violate your rule.
That's right. No rules here.
Pipe organs where you can see the dang pipes.
Mm-hmm. Love it.
I've been in wards where they have literally hidden or taken out the pipes, and it's just heartbreaking in a way to think of the investment in those magnificent organs that have been hidden because it didn't meet current purchasing protocols in the church.
Yeah.
And then the other is stained glass. I've had, in fact, in my last stake, there was stained glass in almost all the wards had beautiful stained glass windows. I think, almost all the ward buildings.
Yeah, Salt Lake's got a handful.
And one of the wards was so prominent. It had been done in like one of the church magazines. And when I was in the Hong Kong Temple, I found a photo of the stained glass from my ward back in Salt Lake in the Hong Kong Temple. So, wow. I would love to see more stained glass in chapels. I know it's expensive, but it's such a magnificent art, or can be. That's what I would do.
Well, I wish, I remember back in the day, my dad's told me stories where, if you needed a building in a certain area, it was up to the local membership to come together and say, we got to raise some funds. Let's do this. Right now we're so spoiled. I'm in Stansbury Park, and the fact that we don't have another building going up, I'm sort of like miffed about it. Like, come on, give us a building here. But I almost wish, I appreciate the funds we have and that we can build buildings without that, localized fundraising. But it would be so cool if maybe a bishopric or a stake presidency could go to the local members and say, okay, they're building a new building. We would like to have stained glass in there. Do you think we could rally some funds here and let's get some stained glass going? And I think people would really step up.
Raise $100,000 to do a magnificent stained glass or something.
And let's make this building our own and do that way. But anyways, that's on the list of many things, as we've already talked about the complexities of running an international church, and whether it's temple recommend questions or stained glass in churches or charging stations, whatever it is. So write your local 70. And since we don't have congressmen in the church, so you can write your
That's right.
So, well, Devin, this has been awesome. I appreciate you coming back to the Twin World. Anything?
Glad to be here.
We haven't said? Anything you want to plug? A side hustle you're doing? Anything like that?
Well, I just remind people, visit thesupercrowd.com to get tickets to Supercrowd 23. So.
And it's a remote conference, so.
Yeah, anyone can go.
Save on travel.
You're in Utah or Maine or Alaska, we want to have you.
Are you emceeing that? Are we going to see you on some virtual stage?
Yes, I will probably MC this one again. I MC'd the last one. We'll see if how that goes. But I enjoy doing that, and we don't have a budget for anyone else to do it. So
nice. Seems like
that's probably what will happen.
Nice. Yeah. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks, Devin. And those listening, this is always fun to get on here and talk about some current events happening in the world of Mormonism. And we encourage you to go check us out. You can see the links to all the articles we talked about by going to thisweekinmormons.com. Of course, follow us on all the social media platforms to see the news as it breaks, and these Christmas videos that we're sharing. So it makes it a little more festive December for you. And of course, help us out to grow and get some consistency on This Week in Mormons by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/thisweekinmormons and help us out. Throw us a few dollars there. And until next week, enjoy being Mormon this week. Goodbye, everybody.